My mother-in-law and sister-in-law treated me like a maid after her husband passed. But while working, I discovered their dark plot, and what I did next left them terrified. I, a 29-year-old female, have been married to my husband, a 32-year-old male, for 3 years now. I'm not particularly close to my family, but my husband has always been very close to his. His family consists of only his mother and his older sister, as his father was never in the picture, and my husband has never met him. My sister-in-law, a female, lost her husband to a heart attack a few months ago. We were all really sorry for her since they'd only been married for a year. I had a good relationship with both of them earlier. We were civil to each other. However, after her husband's death, things changed. Initially, my sister-in-law would occasionally ask me to run errands for her because she claimed she was too depressed to do anything. I'd agree gladly because I wanted to help her out while she was in mourning. Besides, they were only small errands at the time, like buying her groceries or doing her laundry, easy household chores, which I was ready to do without much fuss. Sometimes I'd be too busy with my own work and feel compelled to decline. But then my mother-in-law would call me immediately afterward and emotionally manipulate me into doing what was asked of me. She'd remind me that my sister-in-law was a grieving widow, and I needed to show her kindness and compassion. So I'd end up doing the chores she asked me to do, even if I was dog-tired from my own day. I never mentioned any of this to my husband because he was mostly at work during the day, and when he came back he'd be really tired. Also, this was about his family, and he's very close to them, so I didn't know how to bring it up with him. The longer it went on, the more awkward it began to feel, so I just didn't say anything and continued to do whatever my sister-in-law asked. After a while, I was practically her maid because she was making me do everything, from cooking her meals to doing her laundry and buying her groceries. She probably would have even made me mop the floors of her house, but thankfully she liked doing that herself since it was good exercise. This went on for about 3 months, and by the 3rd month, I was exhausted from working myself to the bone every day. I was taking care of my house, my sister-in-law's apartment, and my business, and it was incredibly exhausting. I wanted to talk to my husband about it, but I still felt really awkward and couldn't find the right time to sit him down and have a discussion. I was also skeptical of how he would react, so I kept it to myself and decided to deal with the situation myself. However, about a week ago, my sister-in-law had me run an errand for her which required me to go through her files, and I ended up calling the cops on her and my mother-in-law because of what I discovered. She had just resumed work after almost 3 months of working from home and had turned her guest room into an office for herself so that it would be more convenient. Fortunately, or unfortunately, the day she was supposed to resume work, she'd accidentally left her laptop at home because she was out of practice. She asked me to get it for her, and after a bit of bickering, I obliged since her house was on my way to work anyway. I've had the keys to her house for a while, and when I went into her office, I realized she'd left her laptop open and unattended on the desk. It wasn't password protected, and my fingers accidentally brushed the touchpad, which activated it. The laptop opened to a screen with an email she'd abandoned midway, and surprisingly, it was an email to her mother. She was telling her about some documents that had been created, and she'd send them to Dad's lawyers at the earliest. I was very confused because for her dad's lawyers to be in touch with her would mean that my father-in-law had somehow been in contact with her. That was strange because they hadn't heard from him for the past 35 years. I could sense immediately that something was off about this and decided to go through her other emails and files. After digging through her emails, I realized that her father's lawyers had indeed been in touch with her, and that was because the man had passed away recently, about a month ago. She'd received some emails from her dad's lawyer regarding his will, where he'd left all his money and property to his ex-partner, my mother-in-law, his kids and their families, as if they had any. The lawyer didn't have her mobile number, so he had to use the email address he'd found after some research. He'd added in the email that he'd been trying to reach my husband as well, but had been unable to so far, and had requested my sister-in-law to provide him with his details so he could reach him. It was quite natural since my husband is pretty much untraceable, he has no social media presence, and the lawyer had been unable to locate him. My sister-in-law was listed on her company's website, so he was able to find her and had been counting on her to let him know my husband's contact information as well. As it turns out, my deceased father-in-law had been quite a wealthy man, and it was almost a $500,000 inheritance that was to be divided between us all, not including the other assets he'd left us. My sister-in-law had been emailing her mother back and forth about all of this, since my mother-in-law didn't have any social media, and she didn't like texting, so emails were her go-to. Through bits and pieces, I found out that they'd been planning to hog the entire inheritance for themselves and were trying to brainstorm a way where they wouldn't have to share any of it with my husband and me. My sister-in-law had come up with the bright idea of claiming that my husband was no longer alive and had even forged a death certificate for him, which she had emailed to my mother-in-law. I could hardly believe my eyes when I realized what they'd been up to all along. They'd very cleverly come up with a plan to exclude my husband from his well-deserved inheritance because they wanted to hog it all for themselves. As soon as I got over the shock of it, I immediately called the cops. I recorded all the evidence I could find on my phone and sent it to my husband while waiting for the police to arrive. In the meantime, my sister-in-law kept messaging me because I was running at least an hour late, and she ended up coming back home. She and the cops arrived at almost the same time, and as soon as they entered the house, she tried to make a run for it. Fortunately, one of the officers grabbed her and placed her under arrest to prevent that from happening again. I guess she'd figured out what was happening. She kept insisting that she'd split the inheritance if I didn't press charges, but I was in no mood to listen to any of her nonsense. I decided to press charges against both my sister-in-law and my mother-in-law, even before my husband could respond, because I was just done. They'd made me work like a maid for months and had tried to cheat my husband out of his inheritance at the same time. This is the lowest that any human being could go, and they unfortunately decided to go that way. They were placed under house arrest, and their calls and texts were under supervision by the police while they investigated the laptop I handed over to them as evidence. They also seized my mother-in-law's laptop and had 2 officers patrolling the area around both their houses. Their movements are being closely monitored, and in short, they have no shot at escaping now. I pressed charges about a week ago, and the investigation is still underway, which is normal because our police department is kind of slow when it comes to technology, from what I've been told. I haven't spoken to or seen my in-laws ever since I pressed charges. I'd already told my husband what I'd found out just after I called the cops, and after I was done with all the legalities and paperwork, I went straight back home, where my husband was waiting to talk to me. He seemed upset when I told him that I'd already called the cops and explained everything I'd found. He said that it was technically his father and his inheritance, and I should have kept out of it and let him deal with it instead of getting the cops involved. I was quite surprised at his reaction since I felt like I'd done the right thing. Also, it technically wasn't his inheritance alone, since the lawyer had clearly stated in the scanned document of the will that he sent that the inheritance was to be divided between my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, my husband, and their families. My sister-in-law didn't have a family, and my husband's family, apart from his mother and sister, was me, so technically, it was my inheritance as well. That's why the police let me press charges in the first place. I think I even said this to him, but he insisted I'd been out of line and shouldn't have meddled in his personal business because now he'd have to be caught up in some legal battle against his own family. I didn't understand or like the way he was reacting to this, and I ended up losing my temper with him. I finally brought up the way his mother and sister had been treating me so far and had been forcing me to work for them day and night. I hadn't said anything because I did think of them as my family to a certain extent, and also because I felt bad for my sister-in-law, who had been widowed at such a young age. So, I'd done everything they'd asked me to without any complaints, but I hadn't received as much as a thank you in return, because that's how entitled and rude they were. On top of that, they'd been trying to cheat us out of an insane inheritance just because they were greedy. Once again, yes, because they were nothing but 2 entitled women with cunning minds and ungrateful, selfish hearts. My husband was taken aback by my outburst, and withdrew into himself after that without even trying to defend what he'd said or his family. I thought we'd talk things out after a day or 2, but that didn't happen. Even though a week passed, he hasn't resumed speaking to me normally. He's still being very quiet and distant, and I really don't know how to fix this or even if I should be the one who needs to fix this right now. We've had our fair share of fights before this, but never one like this. Am I the one at fault for pressing charges against my mother-in-law and sister-in-law for trying to cheat my husband and me out of our inheritance without consulting him first? 3 days have passed since I posted, and my husband and I still haven't spoken about things. There's no word from the detectives assigned to our case either, which means they're still working on the authentication of the emails. But at least now, thanks to you all and my parents, I know that I did nothing wrong. His sister and mother were making me run around, doing her chores and whatnot, just because she'd lost her husband and couldn't bring herself to get out of bed on most days. But when it came to cheating and defrauding people, she was on her game. I don't understand why my husband is still trying to defend her and what she did when it was he who was going to face the biggest financial loss of his entire life had I not intervened at the right time. I'm 100% sure that even if I had called him before the police and asked for his advice, he would have talked to his mother and sister, and they would have very easily manipulated him to let them have the inheritance because they're both single women on their own, and needed the inheritance much more than we do. I can just hear my husband telling me to let it go because life has been harder on them than on us, which is just an absurd way of looking at things, but that's how he always sees it. Even in our last argument, he kept insisting that I shouldn't have gone straight to the cops and should have at least given them a chance to explain themselves because of the same old life has been hard for them nonsense. I'm sorry, but life has been hard on all of us. I lost my twin brother in a car accident 2 days before we were supposed to appear for our SATs, but I still took the test and even scored well. I haven't yet gotten over the grief of that, and I don't think I ever will. I'm not implying that everyone should be the same way that I am, but people should at least have the humanity not to use their spouses' or loved ones' demise as an excuse for their messed up behavior. It cheapens their relationship with their loved ones and lets the world know what a disgusting and shallow human being you are, which is exactly what happened with my sister-in-law and her mom. They were even willing to pass off my husband as deceased just for the sake of money, and if that's not enough to make him see how crazy and greedy they are, then I don't know what is. I just spoke to my husband 3 hours ago. I sat him down after work, and even though he said he was tired, I told him that this discussion needed to be had right now, and we couldn't just keep putting it off indefinitely because that's not how healthy marriages work. I don't know about him, but I wanted our marriage to remain as healthy as possible, despite whatever happened, and whatever has been said and done so far. So, he gave in and decided to talk to me. I was blunt and told him point blank that I couldn't have him continuing to support his mother and sister despite what they did because it was disgusting and low. The fact that he hadn't spoken to me for over a week because he was mad at me for reporting them to the police was crazy. I reminded him yet again that I had every right to do what I'd done since it was very clearly mentioned that the inheritance belonged to me as well as him because I was his family. I was the reason he still stood a chance to get a part of the inheritance that his father had left for him. Had it not been for me, his sister probably would have taken it all for herself and his mom without even thinking twice about him, so it just didn't seem worth it for him to be fighting with me, his only well-wisher as it seems, for their sake. They're the ones who tried to pass him off as deceased, and they didn't even feel sorry for it. They're the ones who were more than happy to screw him over for their own gain. And yet here he was, fighting with me because of them. Also, let's not forget how we even got to this point and how I found out about all of this. They'd been making me work like a maid while cheating me out of a fortune, so to me, they were the epitome of evil and selfishness. I told my husband straight up that I would leave him if he defended his mother and sister or fought with me for them again after this point. He needed to choose between me and them, and that choice had to be final. I probably sounded crazy to him, but I didn't care. I'd let people push me around for a long time, and I couldn't let them do that to me anymore. My husband stayed silent for a few minutes, and I was afraid he'd say that I could leave, but instead, he chose to apologize. He told me he wasn't mad that I'd reported his sister or his mother. I was surprised at that statement because so far that's what it seemed like. But he continued and told me that he was scared because I'd contacted the police, and let's just say he didn't have a good history with cops. My husband and a friend of his had been arrested for underage drinking in college, which isn't that big of a deal, but they'd been treated really cruelly, and that had pretty much scarred him for life. I won't get into the details, but trust me, it was disturbing to hear. I don't know why the cops had been so extreme with them, but he'd ended up fracturing his wrist because of that altercation, and the officers got off scot-free. It finally made sense why my husband was so wary of cops. Anyway, most importantly, this whole thing wasn't even about his mother and sister in the first place, but more about the fact that he was worried that they'd be treated in the same brutal way he'd been. When I reassured him that that was not the case since they'd only been placed under house arrest for now, and even if they were found guilty of fraud, they probably still wouldn't face that long of a sentence, he relaxed. I didn't like them much, and I definitely wanted them to be punished, but not the way my husband had been as a teenager. After that, he told me that he had, in fact, visited his family to make sure they were all right. Once he was sure they weren't being mistreated, he totally chewed them out for everything they'd done so far. He even told them that he was cutting all ties with them once and for all, so they shouldn't expect any mercy during the trial. He'd been planning to talk to me and break the ice for a while now, but just didn't know how to do it because he felt like he'd failed me as a husband. He said he'd been feeling way too awkward and useless to even speak to me because, all this while, I'd been going through so much, and he'd just been doing nothing about it. He was oblivious to everything and felt like a complete fool for letting such things happen. I found myself in a tough spot, having to open up to my husband about the way his mother and sister had been treating me behind his back. I'd kept it all bottled up, thinking I was protecting him from extra stress, especially given everything he was already juggling. But my silence only ended up driving a wedge between us, creating a growing distance that neither of us saw coming. After some raw, honest conversations, we realized we'd hit a rough patch, one born from our failure to communicate openly. We both agreed to put in the work to rebuild that connection, to make sure we're on the same page moving forward. When it came to the inheritance, my husband was overjoyed, though bittersweet, to learn that his late father had left him a substantial portion of his estate. It was a surprise, especially since his father had apparently had a change of heart before passing. My husband expressed a deep curiosity about the man he never knew, wanting to dig into his father's life and understand what led to this unexpected gesture. It hit me then that I'd completely dropped the ball. I hadn't followed up with the lawyer handling the will. I promised myself I'd get in touch with the police as soon as possible to track down the lawyer's email address. We needed to secure what was rightfully ours. Some might call us greedy, but we've poured our hearts into our work, and we felt this inheritance was something we'd earned, a small reward for the struggles we'd faced. The situation with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law took a serious turn. They were sentenced to 2 years in prison, a punishment that felt surprisingly lenient given their actions. With good behavior, they might even be released earlier, but for now, justice has been served. On a brighter note, my husband and I were thrilled to learn that we'd already received the funds left to us in the will. Beyond that, we inherited one of my father-in-law's properties, a beautiful house that far surpassed our expectations. The estate also came with a letter from him, penned with a sense of regret. In it, he explained how, a few years back, he'd had a profound change of heart, but felt it was too late to mend the fractured ties with his family. Diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, he'd been battling the illness in silence and chose to leave his wealth to us, having no immediate family to claim it. His words carried a quiet sorrow, a wish to depart this world peacefully without stirring up old wounds. My husband has been wrestling with complex emotions since learning about his father's passing. The fact that he never had the chance to meet him even once weighs heavily on his heart. Still, the inheritance feels like a small bridge to a man he'll never know, a gesture that carries a sense of closure, however incomplete. We're grateful for his final act of kindness, and wherever he is now, I hope he's found peace. The house we inherited is a game changer for us. We've decided to sell our old place and move into this new one, which sits in a much better neighborhood. It's not just bigger and more beautiful. It feels like the kind of home I used to dream about as a little girl, with its spacious rooms, charming details, and a warmth that makes it feel like it was meant for us. The decision to move wasn't just practical, it was deeply personal. Our old house, while full of memories, had started to feel like a reminder of the struggles we'd been through. The tension, the miscommunications, the weight of family drama. This new house, on the other hand, represents a fresh start. It's a place where we can rebuild, not just our home but our relationship, with open conversations and a renewed commitment to each other. The neighborhood itself is a dream. Quiet, tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, and a sense of community we didn't realize we'd been missing. The house has all these little details I'd always imagined in my ideal home: big windows that let in streams of natural light, a cozy fireplace for chilly evenings, and a backyard where I can picture us hosting summer barbecues, or maybe even starting a small garden. As we settle into this new chapter, I can't help but reflect on how this inheritance has changed our perspective. It's not just about the money or the house, it's about what they represent. For my husband, it's a connection to a father he never knew, a man who, in his final days, wanted to make things right. For me, it's a chance to let go of the hurt caused by his family and focus on building a future that feels hopeful and bright. We're not perfect and we've got work to do, especially when it comes to keeping the lines of communication open. But with this new home and the financial security we've been given, we feel ready to take on whatever comes next, together. My husband has made the bold decision to leave his unfulfilling job and join me as a full partner in my business. We dreamed of this step before, but with my business still in its early stages, he was reluctant to abandon the steady income his job provided. It was a practical choice at the time, offering us stability while we built our foundation. Now, with the financial cushion from the inheritance, we're ready to take the leap and expand the business together. This move feels monumental, a tangible step toward realizing our shared dreams. We're thrilled about the possibilities, knowing that working side by side will bring us closer to the life we've always envisioned, one goal at a time. The idea of building something together, Pouring our combined energy and creativity into a shared vision is exhilarating. It's not just about growing the business. It's about growing as a team, chasing our ambitions hand in hand. On another note, we've taken to heart the advice many of you have shared and decided to seek out a marriage counselor. The way we navigated our recent challenges was far from ideal, and though we've moved past that storm, we're determined to avoid repeating those mistakes. We recognize now that keeping things bottled up and avoiding tough conversations only deepened the rift between us. Bringing in a professional feels like the right way to strengthen our communication and ensure we're better equipped for the future. It's a proactive step, one we're approaching with hope and commitment to making our partnership, both personal and professional, stronger than ever. We're deeply grateful for the support and kindness we've received from all of you. As we embark on this exciting journey as business partners and work to fortify our relationship, please keep us in your thoughts and wish us luck.